Hey there, welcome to True Crime and the Court of Public Opinion. I am Alexis Knight. Here we talk about scandals, headlines, cases, and courtroom chaos. But at the end of the day, and through it all, we are here for one thing: the truth. And in this episode, we're talking about fire, not metaphorically, literally. Wildfires. I'm talking whole cities burned off the map, lives upended, homes erased. You've seen the headlines: Maui, Paradise, Boulder, Santa Rosa. But what you have not seen is what happens next, when the flames are out, but the real damage begins. Because here is the truth: the fire is just the beginning. And if you caught my recent Headline Lies segment that included this, and if you missed it, you really need to catch up on Headline Lies, guys. Just look them up, search for them. But if you caught this one, then you already know there's a reason to question whether these disasters are as natural as they seem. This episode, it's going to pick up where that left off pretty much. We're looking at what happens after the fire, the land grabs, the development rush, homeowners locked out, and the billionaires buying in. We are asking who profits when a city burns? And more importantly, why does it keep happening? And have you noticed? All right, this isn't just about climate. This is about money and silence and planning. And it's happening more than you think. Let's get into it. And all right, guys, let's start with what's already happened. So we're not in any kind of speculation, right? Just the fires, the damage, the destruction, and how fast a town can disappear. So in 2018, the town of Paradise, California, it was wiped off the map. The campfire, as they called it, it didn't just burn, it erased. Over 18,000 structures destroyed. Most of them were homes, and 85 people died. PG&E, the massive utility company, would later admit that their equipment caused it. It was the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California's history. Well, until it wasn't. Then came 2020, the glass fire, in Napa and Sonoma counties. Remember that one? Wildfire season. It started to sound less like a warning and more kind of like a schedule, like we're entering wildfire season. In 2021, flames tore through Boulder County, Colorado. It was December. Not exactly fire season, and yet the Marshall Fire erupts and levels more than 1,000 homes. Middle-class neighborhoods gone in hours. Then came Maui, 2023, Lahaina, once the capital of the Hawaiian Kingdom, incinerated. Over 100 people confirmed dead, dozens missing. And just like Paradise, survivors said there was no warning, and we had no way out. But here's what matters now. This isn't rare anymore. This isn't just climate. We're seeing a pattern. The same headlines, the same corporate players, same blank stares from officials, and after each fire, we see the same thing. And you might have heard me use this term, and I'm going to apply it to this: the playbook. Because there's one for this too. A fire starts under mysterious conditions. Warning systems fail, or they never trigger. Evacuation routes are blocked or poorly managed, and the town is gone in hours. Survivors are scattered, insurance vanishes, and developers conveniently move in. And by the time the public looks up, someone else owns that land. That's the playbook. And the more you study it with this, the more it stops feeling like coincidence. And maybe the next word that's popping into your head right now, well, the term conspiracy theory. Okay, but let's slow it down. This is not about satellites or lasers or some shadowy secret cabal. This is about something really much simpler and much more common: negligence, greed, and quiet legal corruption. Let's look at Paradise one more time. That fire was not some mystery. PG&E admitted they caused it, and they have caused fires before. Faulty equipment, poor maintenance, happens again and again, and no accountability, which allows it to happen again and again. Maui, we're not talking about, a sci-fi plot here. Talking about emergency sirens that never went off, fire hydrants that ran dry, power lines still energized in 70-mile-per-hour winds. None of that is fiction, okay? None of that is theory. This is all recorded, documented. They just don't put it out there for you to see. Oh, and by the way, it's all still unresolved. Fact. And what comes next? Well, people with money swoop in and buy the ashes because the original homeowners, they're too traumatized. They have nowhere to go. They're underinsured or too displaced to rebuild. There's no need to invent villains. They're on the news. They're in the boardrooms. They're on the zoning committees. So no, this is not conspiracy. This is a pattern of real decisions, often made in silence and behind closed doors, playing out the same way, again and again across this country. It's a playbook. So then, what happens after the smoke clears? Well, that's when the next phase of the playbook kicks right in. And if you thought the fires were bad, this part's even worse because it's quieter, less visible, but it's just as destructive. Let's take Paradise again. Most of the people who lived there could not afford to come back. Their homes were underinsured. Their land was tied up in bureaucratic red tape. And while they were fighting with insurance companies, guess what happened? Well, the big money showed up. Developers, they start buying the land cheap. Yep, that's what happens. Venture capital-backed firms, real estate trusts, out-of-town investors. And with that, the identity of the town began to shift. The same happened in Santa Rosa. In Lahaina, it's already starting. Locals have begged officials to put a hold on land sales. And you know what they got? Non-binding resolutions, which is code for, hey, we heard you and we'll be doing nothing. And you know who never has to wait, though? The developers, the construction companies, people with cash and no attachment to what was lost. None. This is not just disaster recovery. This is opportunity for some. It's a modern-day gold rush, and the gold is land. Burn a town, watch prices collapse, then move in fast, rebuild a new version, one that's more profitable for you, more exclusive, and more sanitized. The original residents, pushed out, bought out, priced out, forever. It happened in New Orleans after Katrina. Did you notice? It happened in Paradise. It is happening in Maui right now. And still, no major restrictions are being put in place. No one is stepping in to protect the people who lived there. The message is very clear. If you lose everything, you're on your own. But if you have cash, hey, there's land for the taking. That is the new gold rush. And the wildfires, they've become the spark that starts it all. So then, let's say you survive the fire, all right? Everything's gone, you survive. You want to come back. You want to rebuild. You'd think that would be the hard part, recovering what you lost. But no. The real nightmare, it often starts after all the smoke clears. Because here is what survivors across the country are finding out. If you didn't know, they're not allowed to rebuild or they can't afford to, or the system makes it so impossible they simply give up trying. I mean, how much can someone take after they've lost everything? I mean, start with the insurance. In places like Paradise and Santa Rosa, even Boulder in Colorado, people had homeowners insurance for years, right? But after the fire, suddenly it's just not enough. Premiums skyrocket. Coverage gets denied for technicalities. That's a nice word that we like to throw around. Or policies are canceled altogether. Yes, it's happening. If you don't have $400,000 in cash just lying around, you, my friend, could be just out of luck. And most people don't have that just lying around. And then comes the zoning. Some towns quietly rezone areas after a fire happens. Check into it. They change what's allowed on that land now. And just like that, the place you once lived in is no longer legal to rebuild on. Can you believe that? Did you already know that? Or maybe the process to get a permit becomes so expensive and it becomes complex, right? Very difficult. Only a developer can navigate it. And then there's infrastructure. Sewers, roads, utilities, all destroyed in the fire. And the town, well, they say they will fix it eventually. But you need to pay tens of thousands up front just to even get connected. Even FEMA is not reliable. Delays, lost paperwork, confusing systems. And when help finally arrives, it's usually temporary housing, not long-term solutions. So what is really happening here? The system is making it easier to start over somewhere else than to come back home. On paper, nothing says you can return. But in practice, you're boxed out financially, legally, logistically. And meanwhile, developers, they face none of those obstacles. They get their permits fast. They even get incentives. Sometimes they even get tax breaks for building high-end units on land that once held modest homes. And the original community, it's just gone. And not because they didn't want to stay, but because they weren't allowed to. This is not disaster and recovery. This is not rebuilding. This is replacement. After the fire, while residents are still grieving and, of course, displaced, these buyers, they just come in and they come in fast. They're not neighbors. They're not helpers. I'm talking buyers, investment firms, developers, cash offers on land that was someone's life. I mean, really, did you even know this could happen? In Paradise, California, you want to know what happened? This is not good. People got postcards in the mail within weeks of the fire saying, hey, we can buy your lot, no cleanup required. And most weren't ready to sell. How intrusive. But then with no water and no power and no way to rebuild, right? They're being froze out. No one's cooperating. You need the power company to help you. You need the city to help you. Leaves people with no choice. It's not illegal, right? But it is efficient and not in your favor. And when you're holding nothing but ash and some pieces of paper, efficiency can sound like mercy. But make no mistake, it is a transfer of power from family land to financial portfolio. And I mean, think about this. After the fire, there's always this pause, right? People are mourning. People are also very confused, in shock, and waiting for some answers. But not everyone waits. Because while the survivors are still trying to find a place to sleep, Buyers, they're already circling like vultures. Some are local contractors. Some are house flippers. But the big ones, they are national. They're international. And they're backed by capital. They come with lawyers and spreadsheets and zero emotional attachment to what just happened. In Paradise, people reported getting letters and emails, even knocks on the door offering to take the burden off their hands. I mean, that burden was their family land. In Boulder, after the Marshall Fire, cash offers rolled in from out-of-state buyers. I mean, while families were still trying to navigate their FEMA forms. And in Lahaina, it started before the embers were even cold. Local leaders begged for a halt to land sales, but there was no law in place to stop it. You hear me talk about all the time about these old laws, and if you haven't quite noticed what's happening in the country, it's all these old things that allow for all this fraud and things to take us by surprise. Everything is out of date, and it's not meant to protect you. It's not really fraud, right? Because this is how it is set up. We need to update all of it. But this is for sure predatory. Because when someone has lost every single thing, an offer for this fast cash, it feels like a lifeline. Remember, you are devastated. Even if you're wondering, is this a trap, you feel compelled to take it. These firms, they don't care about rebuilding your community. They care about ROI, about turning burned out blocks into boutique zones. And they're well-versioned on how to move very fast before you even have a chance to think, before residents even understand what's going on. And it has a name, it has a term of its own, and it's not conspiracy theory. It's called disaster capitalism. It's not a theory, guys. This is policy. It's practice. And whether you like it or not, it is happening. So then, what do developers actually build when they get a hold of your land? Let's look at what the rebuild really looks like, because it's rarely what was there before, or why would they be there? So Paradise had neighborhoods filled with modest and middle-class homes. What's rising in their place, however? Fire-hardened megalots with 600,000 plus price tags. The people who lived there before, they are gone. And it's not because they don't want to come back. It's not that they ever thought they couldn't come back. It's because now everything's different all of a sudden and they can't afford to come back. In Santa Rosa, homes lost in the Tubbs fire, they were never replaced one for one. Instead, developers pushed for zoning variances, multi-use spaces. Everyone's into that. They want us stacked on top of each other while they save the land for whatever it is they want to do with it. They want high-density units. Watch it happen. They want mixed retail so you can keep spending money. Local governments signed off. And why? Because they need the tax base. They need progress. But progress is not justice for you if you lost your home in a fire. It does not mean restoration. All that it really means is profitability. In some cases, land that was never zoned for residential use before gets approved overnight, but only for developers, mind you. Not for any survivors, not for the people who built the community. And here is the trick. These deals are very legal, although they do them very quiet, and you know why. They happen at planning board meetings that no one knows about or is willing to talk about. Or they're pre-negotiated by firms who were ready the moment that fire hit conveniently. It's a race, guys, and the residents, they're running barefoot while the developers are already signing at the finish line. This is not rebuilding. This is a reset. And the people, the community, No vote for them. Let's talk about next what gets lost. Not in the fire, but in that rebuild. Because when a town burns, people mourn their homes. But what gets erased next is very hard to see. It is the community. It's the culture. It's identity. And it happens so fast. In Paradise, longtime residents said the new homes felt like strangers. They were bigger and flashier, twice the price. Built for new owners, not for those who lost everything that meant everything to them. In Santa Rosa, fire survivors watched as developers pitched vibrant mixed-use redevelopment plans. That's code for, hey, you don't belong here anymore. You certainly don't live here anymore. And in Lahaina, the cultural loss can't even be priced. That town, it wasn't just buildings. It was sacred ground. It was history, heritage, and home. And if the wrong people control that rebuild, it could turn into something hollow, something unrecognizable. Is this the price of progress? Because the rebuild after fire should mean restoration instead of replacement. And when families can't come home, when the language changes, the faces change, the prices change, it's not just urban development. It's cultural eviction. So yes, recovery plans matter. Zoning boards matter. Who owns the land after disaster matters. Because if we don't protect memory, it gets bulldozed, and in its place, they build something profitable, modern, sanitized, but it's not going to be your home. Even if you lived there your whole life, and your parents lived there, and your grandparents lived there, it's not going to matter anymore. In the days after the Lahaina fire, survivors didn't go home. They were, what? Denied access to what remained of their lives. Roads were closed. Checkpoints were enforced. The justification here, well, safety. Officials said the area was hazardous. It's your home. You can't go there. But what many saw looked less like protection and more like containment. They're controlling who comes in and out. Locals lined up in their own town asking for permission to enter their burned neighborhoods, and some were told to wait. Others were turned away and didn't even get an explanation. National Guard units were deployed, not to help, but to secure the perimeter. While residents stood behind barricades, officials, contractors, and even drone crews, they were inside the zone, walking the streets, flying overhead, mapping out the damage. And we understand some of this, right? I mean, for the media, the disaster was visible. But for the survivors, this becomes a black box. People were not just blocked from their homes, to be clear. They were denied their own dignity here. Some wanted to check on their pets. Others hoped to find family heirlooms, maybe salvage a car, or recover documents. But instead, they were told to stay out. Indefinitely, by the way. And meanwhile, cleanup crews began removing debris. In some cases, land was cleared before the owners had ever returned. One resident arrived at their lot and found it scraped flat. How does that work? There was no vote on this process, no public discussion. Decisions about property access and cleanup were made in closed meetings with emergency management teams, not with the people whose land was being handled. There was no restitution, no apology, just a cold system moving forward while the community was still in shock. And during that time, outside voices started shaping the story. Like this happens every time. Again, the playbook. Politicians made statements. Recovery funds were announced. And land discussions began, but the residents The people who had lost everything, they're still standing outside the gate. Now, the official line was that re-entry had to be carefully controlled, that chemicals in the air, like asbestos, was in the debris, and heat from lingering hotspots made it all unsafe. And this all does make sense to us. But it's what else was going on, right? I mean, these risks are real, asbestos. But what no one explained was why those same risks suddenly just don't apply to federal workers who can walk around, or utility companies and media crews who were already on the ground. And that's something, right? That's a human factor that gets played on all the time. When humans are in shock, they just think, well, they can be in there, they're authorized. We're talking about asbestos. Even if you're authorized, why would you be in there if that were the case? What became very clear was this: access was not just about safety. This was about control. By limiting who could enter, or re-enter as it were, officials controlled the narrative. They controlled the optics. They ensured that the only stories told came from the approved sources: press releases, spokespersons, flyover videos. Survivors were not allowed to speak with reporters on site because they weren't even allowed on site. In the vacuum of local presence, outside interpretations flourished. Lahaina will rebuild stronger, they said. Makes us all feel better. Or, this is a chance to modernize. A good thing. Recovery planning was already underway before survivors could collect their dead or stand on their own land. Real estate firms began circling. Yep, development companies began scouting, and the people who called Lahaina their home were still waiting for a pass to walk down their own street. Some tried to push through, some even protested, but few had power. And during those crucial first weeks, the groundwork for the next version of Lahaina was already being laid without them. This wasn't about keeping people safe. It was about keeping them out. Now, eventually, residents were allowed to return, but it came with terms: time-limited visits, escorts. Escorts? They couldn't come and go freely. Each visit was a controlled operation, escorted by authorities wearing protective gear, timed down to the minute. Residents who had lived in Lahaina for decades were now treated like outsiders, needing clearance to step onto their own land. Some were told not to bring cameras. Others were warned not to dig or disturb the debris. People who had lost everything were given less autonomy than the contractors already working on their lots. One woman said she arrived to find a debris removal crew already hauling what was left of her home into a dumpster. No one had asked. No one had told her. No one had waited. This damage was not just physical, it was psychological. And it's happening more and more to the people, the public, than before. Now, here, returning to that ground was supposed to bring closure, but instead it just raised more questions. Residents stood on flattened earth trying to figure out where their front doors used to be. Some cried, some couldn't speak. Others just stared. I mean, they were stunned that their lives had been cleared without their input. I cannot imagine. And still, no formal apology. No elected official stood beside them to take responsibility for the weeks of forced absence. No public explanation of who authorized early cleanup or what rights property owners even have during this process. Do you know yours out there? Because I'm going to go look at mine. Behind the scenes, rebuilding plans were accelerating. Recovery teams were moving fast, redrawing maps, identifying those opportunity zones. and developers were being looped in. This is all before survivors had even laid eyes on what of their own things remained. Some families were told their lots might be unsuitable to rebuild due to safety or infrastructure challenges. I'd ask what exactly that means, and that, I guess, would mean no one can build on this ever. Others discovered zoning may change entirely. How does this happen just because you have a disaster to your home? One family was informed casually that their land was now being considered for a public access easement. All of this happened while the people were still grieving and in shock, still displaced, still reeling. Returning wasn't just about closure, it was supposed to be reclamation. But what many found instead was a town already being transformed, and not by them, but around them. And by the time the smoke had cleared, well, it was very clear. What Lahaina lost in the fire, it risked losing again in process. After the fire, survivors in Lahaina expected help. Wouldn't we all? They expected the government to show up with real relief. They expected FEMA to do what it promised and provide shelter and aid and direction. Instead, what they got was confusion, delay, and bureaucracy. And it just made things worse. FEMA arrived slowly. Resource centers were eventually set up across Maui, but they were overwhelmed from day one. People waited in long lines, only to be handed pamphlets and told to fill out paperwork online. Now, despite many not even having their phones or computers, of course, or any reliable internet provided to them, entire families who had lost everything were told to go to these websites that they couldn't even access and submit documents they didn't have, and wait for responses that, guess what, never came. Meanwhile, the messaging was disorganized. One official said hotels would be used for short-term housing. Another said that trailers were coming. Some were told they'd receive checks within weeks. Others, nothing. Now, after months after the fire, hundreds are still living out of cars. They were still living in gymnasiums, friends' couches. FEMA trailers started arriving late but came with conditions. Applicants had to prove residency, their income status, and what exactly the damage was. At a time when many, they don't have any paperwork. They don't even have their IDs. They have no home address to even list. Even those that got approved, they waited weeks for placement. And by then, some had just left the island entirely. Was that the point? And then came the second blow, the insurance. Survivors with homeowners insurance that thought they were protected. I can't say this enough, check yours, because these guys were not. Some were told their policies didn't cover this kind of fire. Others got checks for a fraction of what it would cost to rebuild. And many policies had, loopholes. Fine print that required itemized documentation for things already turned into ash. Insurance adjusters dragged their feet. Payouts stalled. Deadlines passed. And companies began quietly canceling policies altogether, claiming increased fire risk. Renters, they fared even worse, guys. The vast majority had no coverage at all. No one was offering temporary rental assistance, fast enough anyway, and many were forced to choose. Leave Maui so you can survive, or stay and maybe become homeless. People weren't just fighting a fire. They were now fighting the system that was supposed to help them recover from this disaster. And in that gap between need and response, people were breaking down. They stopped believing anyone was coming. They realized that recovery was something they'd have to figure out on their own. For all the promises made by FEMA, insurers, officials, Lahaina survivors were left in limbo. Their town gone, their homes gone, and now their safety net, it's gone too. While survivors tried to navigate FEMA's application maze and battle insurance denials, the financial damage only escalated. Many families were still paying mortgages on their homes that were now nothing but ash. I mean, the nightmare is real, guys. We don't hear about it when you're not living next to it. It's amazing how much information we do not get. Now, some lenders offered temporary deferment, but others, hey, they didn't pause at all. You need to keep paying. People found themselves making payments on properties they couldn't even access while living in hotel rooms or sleeping in their cars. Even those lucky enough to receive partial insurance checks, they learned quickly that it did not go far. The cost just to demolish and clear a lot could wipe out an entire payout. Rebuilding's not even on the table yet in this scenario, not when people still had no idea where they're going to live the next night. And for a disturbing number of residents, there was no insurance payout at all. Some had lapsed policies, often due to rising premiums they could no longer afford. Interesting. Others were told their coverage excluded wildfires under certain circumstances, like wind-driven flames or acts of God. I can't believe this. Then there were the renters. Lahaina had a large population of tenants, many in informal housing arrangements with no lease, no renter's insurance. These people were left entirely unprotected with no claim to file, no compensation offered. That's it, guys. Then came the eligibility confusion. FEMA assistance, depends on very specific qualifications if you didn't know. And those qualifications, they didn't fit the way many native Hawaiian families live. Generational homes shared among siblings and cousins, well, they don't meet FEMA's strict residency standards. Others couldn't produce documentation because everything burned, of course, like their birth certificates, property tax receipts, even identification cards were all gone. And without any paperwork, there's no aid. Even those who got through the first stage of approval, they were met with radio silence. One FEMA rep would say a file was complete. The next would say, well, it's not. Appeals had no deadlines. Phone calls went unanswered. Survivors started to realize they weren't just being delayed, they're being buried. No one seemed to be in charge. The county blamed the feds. The feds blamed the state. Insurance companies blamed policy language. And the developers, well, they just move about their business. They don't talk to anyone, and they don't wait for anyone. So survivors did what they had to. They launched a GoFundMe pages, to pay for meals and hotel nights. They leaned on their churches. They relied on perfect strangers and grassroots aid groups, often more responsive than any agency on the official roster. This is the reality, guys. Some even pooled money together to rent storage lockers just to hold their donated supplies because they don't have anywhere to put them. They were organizing their own recovery piece by piece, very small, because no one else was doing anything for them. In community forums, the tone shifted from grief to anger. The trust was gone. Residents weren't just heartbroken, they were insulted, betrayed, disrespected, forgotten by the very systems they were told to rely on. And this story just sounds all too familiar these days, doesn't it, guys? This playbook fits so many different scenarios. And in that loss between loss and help, this is what I mean. There's always something else that creeps in, and I'm calling it opportunity. Not for the survivors, but for the outside world watching the disaster unfold. That is not right. But it's reality, because if help didn't show up fast enough, investors would. While FEMA fumbled and insurance companies stalled, those others moved in quickly and with purpose. Within days of the fire, long before most residents were even allowed to step back onto their properties, remember, developers and investors were already making moves. Some survivors reported they received offers to purchase their land less than a week after the flames died down. The outreach came through postcards and cold calls, emails, even unannounced visits, if you can believe that. A stranger would knock on the door, if the residents still had one, and offer a handshake, a business card, and a line that went something like this: "Hey, we know you're going through a lot. We're here to help." But they weren't there to help. They were there to acquire. What they offered was fast cash, a quick sale, no hassle, no cleanup. But what they were really asking for, okay, it's everything. A family's only asset. Land that for many had been passed down across generations, property that held history and memories and meaning. And at a time when basic survival was still uncertain, those offers started to look appealing. This is what disaster capitalism looks like. It's wrapped up in empathy, timed for maximum leverage. It wasn't just big mainland corporations. It was real estate agents, private equity groups, quiet investors with deep pockets and very vague intentions. Lahaina, one of the most historic and desirable towns in the Pacific, was suddenly full of open lots and empty families. The governor issued a press statement urging residents not to sell. He called for compassion and said land should stay in the hands of locals. But there was no executive order, no emergency freeze, no legal protections. Just suggestions and then silence. And while residents were waiting for trailers, fighting for insurance claims, and literally begging FEMA for clarity, buyers had time. They had lawyers, they had plans, and they had all the freedom to move very quickly. Some even offered relocation packages. Hey, we'll give you cash and a fresh start if you move to the mainland. It sounded generous when you're hurting until you realize what it really is. It is displacement. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, early redevelopment conversations were already underway. Reimagine Lahaina, officials said. Modernize the infrastructure, build it back stronger. But what does that mean when you hear that? Who exactly are they talking about is going to benefit from all of this? None of the meetings were driven by survivors. None prioritized returning displaced residents. And when you're not there on the ground, you might think that's what's happening, right? It's what one would assume. Hopefully they're getting the help they need, and hopefully they can rebuild soon. No one guaranteed that Native Hawaiian families would ever be able to afford to come back. The people who lived there, they weren't being consulted. They were being erased, quietly, efficiently, and very legally. So when people asked, hey, when do we get to rebuild? The real question, what it turned into was, hey, do we get to rebuild at all? Because the longer that help was delayed, the faster land changed hands. And in that vacuum, developers didn't just show up, guys. They seriously got to work. As developers and real estate interests began quietly acquiring land, something else started happening, something even more insidious. Recovery planning began to move behind closed doors. Official meetings, early drafts of redevelopment proposals, and zoning conversations started unfolding out of public view. It's like, hey, look at all this open land. What can we do with it? Lahaina's future wasn't being shaped in open forums with survivors. It was being quietly redrawn in back rooms and private offices. And the language used was very smooth, corporate, and very prepackaged. public-private partnerships, smart redevelopment, green infrastructure, resilient recovery. All sounds great, doesn't it? I mean, to the public, it sounds like progress. But beneath that language was exclusion. The very people who lost homes and history and community, they were nowhere near that planning table. Cultural preservation leaders raised their hands. Historians warned about the erasure of sacred sites. And local families pleaded for transparency. But their voices were politely acknowledged and then sidelined. It takes an army, guys. We all need to stand up for things like this together. That's how we are heard. These people locally sidelined. While behind the scenes, state-level emergency powers were giving government agencies the authority to override normal permitting and planning procedures. Zoning boards were approving variance requests at rapid speed. Infrastructure plans were being drafted with private consultants, many of whom had no cultural ties to the area. Even terminology was being used very strategically. Okay, things like opportunity zones, economic revitalization, mixed-use corridors. Maybe you've seen these terms used. None of these phrases guaranteed affordable housing. None guarantee any cultural protection. They simply indicate that money was moving, and it's moving very fast. Some officials even began describing the area as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to redesign Lahaina for the modern era. You know what that means, guys? It means more tourism, more commerce, more control, more profits. For who, do you think? Because at no point in these conversations did anyone publicly guarantee that the people of Lahaina, the families who had been there for generations, would ever be able to return. There were no protections, no mandates to prioritize displaced residents, and no timeline for equitable access to rebuilt homes. This is not what anyone on the outside of these disasters would expect, or if you're in the disaster. It's just that if you're in the disaster, you're finding these things out firsthand. And it's hard for the rest of the people to even believe this is not supposed to be the American way. And while officials spoke about resilience, they weren't referring to the people. They were talking about the infrastructure, guys. The roads, the buildings, all that potential. Lahaina was not being restored. It was being reimagined. Even housing proposals reflected this shift. Instead of prioritizing single-family homes or community-based rebuilding, many drafts featured high-density complexes, retail-adjacent housing. You've seen it. It's popping up all over the place. Short-term rental expansions, none of which were designed with displaced locals in mind, so they could go back home. The contrast was staggering. On one side, families still fighting FEMA for trailers and insurance checks. And then on the other hand, you have consultants mapping out luxury redevelopment concepts with investor backing. And by the time many residents were finally able to even access their own properties, decisions about Lahaina's next chapter had already been drafted without them. And this is how displacement becomes permanent. It's not through force, it's through process, slow and quiet. It's all done through silence, through the speed of deals made while everyone else is still, they're all stunned and exhausted and waiting, scared. Unless it is stopped, this is not recovery, this is rebranding. It is removal by design. And this stuff just goes on and on and on. When you step back and look at everything that happened in Lahaina alone, from the fire itself to the silence that followed, it really does start to become clear. It wasn't just about the disaster. It was a sequence, a system, a playbook. First came the fire, fast, wind-driven, and deadly, but not without warning. This was not a freak event. Lahaina was flagged as high risk in report after report. Officials had the time to plan, but they did not. Power lines stayed active. Sirens stayed silent. Evacuations failed. It's like this was all passively just allowed. Lives were lost. This was serious. More than 100 confirmed dead. Dozens more still missing. And then next came the silence. FEMA, late. Insurance companies hedged. Renters left in the cold. Families without documents. All of this going on. I mean, survivors who had just fled for their lives were told to fill out forms online. I mean, in that vacuum, while people were sleeping in their cars, developers were moving. Offers to buy land were pouring in. There was no emergency freeze on sales and no emergency protections. And while the residents were locked out of their own properties, literally, these meetings are happening. Not public meetings, private ones. Redevelopment plans being drafted in terms like resilience and smart growth and mixed use potential. They start to dominate. And when things become normal for us, we stop questioning them. But we should be questioning all of this. Consultants and contractors were looped in before any survivors even got a full list of resources. This was like a grab. Locals were not asked what they wanted. They weren't asked anything. The language was clear. This is a chance to reimagine Lahaina. But reimagining meant replacing. Look, if you only look at one part of this, you might think it was incompetence, maybe poor coordination. But if you look at the timeline, and I mean all of it, it is not disorganized. It is the playbook. Disaster hits, systems stall, pressure builds, land flips, development begins, community erased. It happened in Paradise. It happened in Santa Rosa, in Boulder. It's now happening in Lahaina, and if no one stops it, it will happen again. This is not about fires. It's about what happens after. It's about how tragedy becomes transaction, how loss becomes leverage. Why are we not removing the power from these power lines? Why are we passively allowing this? I mean, that's the crime. It's a strategy. It's a lot, guys. Here's where we're going to leave it today. I mean, Lahaina burned, and what came next was not random. Wasn't nature. It was a series of choices. No sirens, no water, no escape. We have seen this all before. Then came the delays, the buyouts, the rebuild, without the people who actually lived there. And that's the part they don't say out loud, because it's not about the fires. It's about what happens after, that opportunity, the land, the leverage, the silence. I mean, this episode isn't here to make you feel good about any of this. It's here to make things clear. Of course, I could not get to every angle on this. There's too much to it. The policies, the power moves, the redevelopment meetings no one got invited to. This story isn't over. It's definitely still unfolding. In courtrooms and land details and in quiet back channels that most people just never see. But you can see it now. If you didn't know any of this before, hopefully you know something now. You know, it's like I always say, if you think no one's paying attention, think again. Trying to get it here, trying to say it. Thank you for listening to True Crime and the Court of Public Opinion. I'm Alexis Knight. Stay sharp out there. Ask the difficult questions, guys, and always demand the truth. And definitely, if you own a home, look into your homeowner's insurance. Talk to you guys the next time.